Hi, Diane. Thank you so much for participating in my project. Could you say a little bit about yourself?
Hi, I am Dianne Dotson, but call me Diane. I'm a science fiction and fantasy and horror author. I'm also a science writer and an artist. I have a background in ecology and evolutionary biology, as well as clinical research. I have a lifelong interest in space. I formed an astronomy club back in the 80s for my neighborhood friends when I was age 10. So space and I go way back, you could say. And I like to write about space as well as life science. So those are some of the things that I do.
Do you have any recollection on that moment when you first became aware of space?
I always liked to hang out outside in the summers when I was a very tiny girl in East Tennessee. And I would look up at the stars and not really understand much except from what I saw on Star Trek reruns. And then eventually when I saw Star Wars at age 3 in the theater, which changed my whole life, and eventually ended up writing my own space operas. But so I would say probably those summer nights, and then eventually I grew to love winter nights the most for stargazing, but probably summer nights outside in Tennessee among the fireflies.
How was light pollution?
It was not as terrible as you might think. I lived in a city, but it was a small city, but we did have a decent amount of light pollution. Then I ended up moving when I was about 6 years old out to the country away from the city. And then it was marvelous because then I had full view at night. And that's when I really, really got more interested in space and stargazing. My father had built his own telescope and other things. So we would stargaze and talk about it. And then I eventually brought my mother into it, and got into it together a little bit. So it was kind of an all in the family thing to stargaze at night. It was a lot of fun.
If you consider that most people live in cities with very bright lights and only the brightest stars are possible to see, I mean, you can't even see the Milky Way galaxy.
Right.
What kind of effect do you think this would have on people's interest in space and what's out there and going there?
I think if you get away from the city, and being in Los Angeles, obviously we do have light pollution. You can see more than you would think here, though, which is surprising to me. But if you just went east a bit to the desert, you can see everything, and it's magnificent. And I think if you have the ability to see that, you can also see that on the ocean, of course. And it changes you very quickly when you realize how vast space is and how many stars there are. When you can see all of that band of Milky Way across the sky, and just realize that's a tiny piece of it, and we're a tiny piece of that tiny piece, and as we've learned this week, it goes way back, and there's far more out there than our little galaxy alone. So
I know, just thinking about what those James Webb Telescope images actually mean in terms of number
right.
of stars and number of planets and how minuscule we are.
Unfathomable, right? So, and then, it pretty much guarantees that we're probably not alone. We just can't prove it just yet. But, I also saw the WASP planet. I can't remember the number, that has water in its atmosphere. So that was cool news coming out of JWST as well.
I think I'm a little behind. I saw the images from the presidential reveal on Monday, but the Tuesday primary reveal, I haven't had a chance to process that yet.
You are in for absolute wonder and delight. It is unbelievable. So go after we're off of this and go look at those images. It's just spectacular.
Now, you mentioned you saw Star Trek before Star Wars, but that Star Wars really made the impression on you. Could you talk a little bit more about that?
Well, I think because, when I saw Star Wars, I was 3. And so I could remember things a little bit better than I was a bit younger. And when I was that young, this was the late 70s, well, mid 70s, really. I was born in 74. So by the time I was able to watch TV and understood it at all, it was probably about 76 when I was 2. And Star Trek was on reruns. We didn't have cable at that time. So you had like 3 channels. You had to try to get the antenna and all this to work. So Star Trek, I do remember being something I watched, as well as Lost in Space reruns. But Star Wars was so immersive because of in a theater, and I just was a very impressionable age, I think. And when I saw Alderaan blow up, I thought that was Earth. I thought they were showing Earth. So, but I was, fascinated. There was a girl in space doing cool stuff, and I'm like, oh wow, And then of course you go to a desert planet and meet Luke and everything else. But Leia and the droids, instantly I was attracted to them, and I loved seeing the faster than light travel. So I just was. These are different things that were sort of shaping me a bit, and it's called Star Wars after all. So that was where all that began. And ever since then, I was all into science fiction. When Battlestar Galactica came on TV in the late 70s, I would watch every episode of that, as well as the 70s version of Buck Rogers. So anything having to do with space, I was in. I was all in for the rest of my life.
I like to run analysis that I have about Star Trek and Star Wars and get your take, both as a space enthusiast and as a science fiction writer, and just from your personal experiences. Star Trek is very clean. Humanity has its act together. It's hopeful. We are, it's a positive vision that people can see. Star Wars is very much like life is today. It's very messy. It's not so hopeful. There's forces that we don't understand at work that can, take the most sophisticated systems and make them inadequate. And I was just wondering if you share that same kind of analysis, or what you think.
Yeah, definitely. There was sort of a utopian future in Star Trek, in the original series, at any rate, that we didn't have to worry about money. We didn't have to worry about disease, hunger, any of that, because that was taken care of. We had to deal with border conflicts, neutral zone stuff with the Romulans and Klingons and, a few madmen out in space and things like that. And it was more about, being a frontier exploration science mission. And that left an impression on me in a different way, because I went into science. So, and I really loved Spock and his logical approach to things. But Star Wars, it was run down, messy, weathered, kind of scruffy, beaten up. There were hints of a time before in which it was more civilized. And now you're sort of in this degradation, this devolution of things, and bad guys were in power, so it was. And you were also, a lot of it being on Tatooine, which was basically, kind of the dumpster of the galaxy, so backwater planet. So yeah, it was a very different look and feel. And then you had 2 years later, Alien, which was a whole nother feel in space. And that was interesting to me. I didn't see it until I was like 12. I actually saw Aliens first. And so can we talk about that for a second and the contrast between the other two?
Yeah, absolutely.
Because I think it kind of feeds into Space Race a little bit, because Weyland-Yutani being the company or mother mentioned in Alien, is this sort of incredibly money-focused corporation that is obviously, funneling funds into finding bioweapons like the xenomorph, the alien itself, knowing that, the signal that they picked up, they knew exactly what it was, what they were sending this crew into. And, they had the android Ash, and it was just that's a very dystopian future in which, the company is in charge of all space stuff. For so far as we know, if there's a research arm to it, we're not shown that. It's just corporate, these are space miners essentially, and space truckers, and then having to deal with a corporate or overlord that doesn't care at all about their lives or their suffering. It's all about the bottom line. So that's another vision of space and future space that I think is actually something to think about right now, because we're entering commercial space travel, increasing it and things like that. And while we may not have xenomorphs out there, it is going to be interesting to see how that contrasts with a research and exploration model versus a corporate model after resources, whatever they may be.
Absolutely. It feels like Star Trek, though, provided that utopian kind of shared vision that was even people who were not Trekkies were aware of Star Trek and were kind of could relate to the positive vision, even if they didn't like it. They may have liked the vision, just not the show.
Right.
But I feel like now with the internet and with just how fragmented like popular culture has become, it seems like there's really not an opportunity to have a shared common view of what that positive future looks like. Like, I
Yeah.
mean, you have a gazillion people talking about how the world's wrong, but you
Yeah.
don't have any common view on how the world could be made right.
Right. There's not a unifying federation situation. We have our just myriad little bubbles that, we kind of, it's becoming just bubbles at this point where we don't want to interact with other people that don't share our views because, I mean, sometimes it's frankly not safe to do so. And that's a shame. So we don't have that sort of that safety situation of having the federation, of having this unified front for exploration and humanity. And I hope that we figure this out because we would all benefit from it, and that's the dream, right? That's the dream of Star Trek, is unity and exploration. No matter what your species is, no matter where you're from, no matter what your background is, you can make it in Starfleet.
What do you see as being a path that would get us to a positive future? I mean, just assuming you could control the world and everything. I mean, what would that path look like?
I wouldn't want to control it myself, but I think that's where I would see you need a unified group of people, a pretty big unified group of people. And I think that what we don't want to lose sight of, and I worry that we are, is losing wonder, losing that feeling of looking up at those stars and feeling that you are a small piece of a great whole, out there. And that we also, we're tenants of this world that we live on, and we have not yet gone to another world to live. So we're faced with some pretty significant threats, from various and sundry sources right now. And if we could just figure out how to do that, I don't have an answer for it. I wish that I did. I do think that celebrating wonder, increasing funding in education and exploration and science, because science is not some tower. It's right in front of us. We're using it all the time. It's around us, it's just a matter of understanding. It's helping us understand things. We test, we try different things, and we move incrementally forward, and the space race led to a lot of our modern discoveries that helped us move forward and find medical cures and developments and robotics and everything like that. So if we could just crystallize that wonder and promote that, is like, that's the future that we want, and we have some wonderful missions coming up that I think will capture the public interest. And obviously the telescope images yesterday and the day before, that was a global moment of celebration. Like, we did this as a species. This wasn't just putting a flag in something. This was an effort that took a long time to get here, and a modified front, a unified front in which we seek and we find and we celebrate. And those are the things that I wish that we would do more, those three things: seek, find, and celebrate. So, because I think that we all face suffering and existential threats and things like that. There are things that we can all appreciate, though. And I hope that space can help us do that, and that future moon missions can as well, and recapture that public interest that so captivated the world when we took Apollo 11 and landed on the moon. And our missions continued till 1972, and things changed. The space race ended essentially as soon as we landed on the moon. So we can talk about that in a minute, because there is a show that I would like to talk about that addresses this.
Well, why don't we go ahead and talk about it? What are your thoughts?
For All Mankind on Apple TV Plus is the best thing on television right now. And I think it would do everybody a lot of good to watch it. It gives us an alternate history of how the space race went and how women's place in the space race went as well. And I don't want to spoil it for people, because I do feel like watching it unfold is an incredible thrill. But just know that there were opportunities that came about that I was never able to experience as a woman. Like, I didn't see a woman on the moon. we have not seen a woman on the moon at all. And, that needs to change. And also, we need space to be accessible. We need accessibility for all. We don't need we do need, the strongest, fittest and whatever, sure, to go and, seek out new life, new civilizations or whatever. No, but we need it to be for everybody. We need it to be for people who have accessibility issues. They should be able to go to space too. And I feel very strongly about that. And I feel strongly too that we should have spacesuits that fit everyone. That was an issue a few years ago on the space station. So I feel like For All Mankind gave us another look at what could have been. And it's almost painful to watch, but it's so well done that you understand the risks that were involved and all the challenges that everybody would have had to have gone through. It's pretty well done, thinking in terms of the time, that era and everything. So it's definitely worth watching.
It is amazingly well done, and it feels like you are not watching a movie, but you're
Right.
watching a documentary, or you're watching the news. Yeah. And I've seen season 1 and 2. I think I'm halfway through season 3.
I have not seen the later seasons, so but I know the gist of what happens. Yeah.
It is an amazing show. Is there a risk though? I mean, you and I are really steeped in the history of Apollo and like the real history.
Right.
What kind of risk is there for people who aren't as grounded in that history, looking at it, walking away with some really strange ideas on what happened?
For viewers that don't know the history?
Exactly.
Well, they would have a lot of questions of like, well, why the heck didn't we do this? Which, to be honest with you, I do too, because, it's really infuriating that we had to give it up because of budgetary reasons, essentially, that we couldn't fund this phase, and then we moved over to the shuttle program. And that didn't get us back to the moon. It did get us to the International Space Station eventually in its own way, so it was, and that was a wonderful, and still is, an amazing accomplishment that we have people living, in orbit of the Earth. But to get us back to the moon, it just feels like we really dragged our feet on this. And I know the money was allocated elsewhere, and there's nothing we can do about that. But to explain to people today who didn't know the history, younger people that are watching the show, I don't have a good answer for them. They'd be like, why couldn't we have done that? Money, really? So then it's priority, like, where are you putting the money? Yes, we need money here on Earth, in our cities, in our towns. We need that, yes. But we also need research. And frankly, we have a lot of incredibly wealthy people in the world who could have already funded that stuff, to be quite honest with you. And I know that some of that is being made up for now, but it needs to be for everybody. Space needs to be for everybody, not just the few.
I have a theory I want to toss by you that might challenge what you just said. And that is, we talked about all these great technologies that we got out of the Apollo program. But I think the real thing that we got out of the Apollo program was a technical engineering science focused workforce that suddenly became dirt cheap.
Yeah.
And was, spread throughout the economy, solving all sorts of problems that ultimately led into the world that we have today. I just wonder if we would still have had the developments in all these other areas if that workforce wasn't suddenly freed up.
Well, I don't know, because I feel like whatever we would have discovered would have continued the research, and it would have excited the public. And I think we still would have had a track of high tech and maybe more advanced tech in some ways. It's hard to say. We'll never know. But I don't think that, like, we would have had a workforce probably with more women in the workforce. That would have been a massive benefit to all womankind, to be quite frank, and to be inspired to get in there. And I think that because we didn't have that inspiration, that's not great. But we did benefit from the brilliant minds who worked for this.
Are you still there?
Sorry,
It
there
looks
was a
like,
bit of a lag there.
yeah, it kind of froze for a second, but you're talking about we would have benefited a lot by having more women in the workforce. Is
Yeah,
where kind of got
we would
cut
have.
off.
But we did benefit from the many engineers, men and women, everybody who worked for the Apollo programs, and all the sort of ripples coming out from that. We definitely benefited. So it's just always it's neat to see it on the small screen as a what if scenario, but we can't go back, we can't change it, but we can draw from it inspiration to move forward. And we're at a really interesting time in history to do that. So because now we do have private space ventures that we didn't have then. So it's a fascinating time, and there's going to be a rapid acceleration of knowledge. And we already have it across all other sciences because our technology is as good as it is. And that might not have happened without Apollo, So it's a really interesting time. And I think so much has been delayed for so long, and now it finally feels like it's happening, right? We're getting ready to go back to the moon. We're finally, we've sent, the probes of Voyager are way out of our solar system now. They're in interstellar space. Like we finally are starting to get moving, and we're preparing for Mars, things like that. So it's happening. That's just a really exciting time, in my opinion, to be in space.
And so talking about the last time I went to the moon was 1972. And I guess when and how and where did you find out that we're planning to send people back to the moon in 2024? Like, when did you hear that was the goal?
I don't even remember exactly when it was, to be honest with you. I was just like, well, it's about time. That's kind of the thought I had. I'd been following with interest the International Space Station, and that was inspiring me to write about remote space stations like that one, which is way out at the heliopause, like the title. So I was kind of interested I've always been more interested in Mars personally, because it's a whole other actual big planet. It's not a satellite, and so I've always been interested in Mars. But at the same time, I do realize we do need a presence on the moon to help with, solar system exploration and additional research, and also to help us prepare for long-term settlements on another world that is not our own. So I don't remember the exact time, but I do remember feeling glad that we were finally moving forward with it.
And when you found out the goal was to have a woman on that first mission,
Yes.
what was your reaction and thoughts?
It's about time. I used to joke because I originally wanted to be an astronaut, and I saw the Challenger explode, so there was a sort of a divergence of, do I really want to do this, and eventually I ended up going into science and life science, not space, for various reasons. I never went back to do astrophysics, but I did think about it. But I always used to say, that I hoped that the first person on Mars was a woman. So that would at least, kind of make up for that milestone. So I'll be very glad to have a woman setting foot on the moon, and a person of color as well. So this is long overdue.
Now, with this project I started in 2019, my goal was to go up to random people at coffee shops and at the mall and airport, and the person sitting next to me on the train or what have you, and ask them, did you know about it? What you think about it? That type of thing. Of the non-space people, I would say only about 20% of them know that we're going back to the moon. And I was wondering if that's consistent with your experience.
We just don't talk about it, and that's bias on our part, I think, because, we grew up in an era in which the Apollo missions were still very fresh in a lot of people's minds, even if we didn't see them because we were too young or not around yet in my case. Because I was born in 1974, and I didn't see it. So I feel like younger generations kind of take for granted that we have so much capability and so much going on, and they've seen a lot of dramatizations of visits to the moon, both science fiction, both documentary and things like that, that it's not as in the public eye as it was for us. So I feel like there's a bit of bias there. And also I feel like a lot of people, they get used to seeing, oh, there's another rocket that's going up. They're going up all the time, right? And we can watch them. We can watch them on our phone, which is pretty awesome, right? And I feel like it's just kind of taken the glamour away from it, and it's just not in the public knowledge overall. That's my theory. I don't know for sure. And I do hear a lot of blowback of being like, why don't we spend the money here on Earth? And I'm like, what? There's money to be spent that could be spent in the right places, and I think that's a budgetary thing that can be done to solve all the problems, but there's a lot of inequality there. So that can be fixed. And I don't believe in the mentality that it cannot. I think that we just have to have the will to do it. We have to have the will to take care of ourselves, our planet, and our research, and our place in the universe. We can do it all. I do think that. And I'm hoping that another mission to the moon can captivate at least the younger generations, that are coming forward, and they'll think that's really cool. And I think especially the Mars mission is going to be a tipping point for a lot of people.
Yeah, I think a lot of people are misguided on how much we actually spend on NASA. I hear that the DoD, the Department of Defense, is supposed to get a budget increase of like 35 billion this year. Billion, yeah, which is 1.5 times NASA's entire budget. So,
right.
Like, just the increase in defense spending would give you, an additional whole NASA plus a half a NASA.
Right.
It's just like.
And now we have Space Force, which is part of the armed forces. So it's going to be interesting just to tease all of that out, and where do we intersect with that? And that's interesting because I had a conversation the other day about Space Force and the future potential there. And, I don't have a solution to that either. I do wish that we would come up with maybe, if not quite a Starfleet, but some sort of unified global space administration, and go from there. That doesn't rely on one country, but is a global effort. I think that that's probably going to be the way to go, to make this work. And I don't know what we'll have to do to get to that point, but it would do us all a lot of good, because then we could pull a lot of resources, a lot of knowledge and talent, and it makes sense,
You create imaginary worlds for people to go to.
Yeah.
If we take that imagination and basically extrapolate where we are now and where you think the world's going, where do you think we'd be in 200 years?
That's a good question. There's so many things going on right now that you could go any way. And, I set a story basically 300 years in the future, because I'm assuming that there will be a lot of ups and downs, that we will have a lot of massive setbacks, and for whatever, climate collapse, war, hunger, water issues, you name it. Humans are volatile, and we also are on a volatile planet. So we have to think about that too, that it's not a planet that sits at rest and cold. It is an active world that spews massive super volcanoes from time to time. We could have an asteroid strike. A lot of things could happen, but one thing is for sure is that humanity is predictably unpredictable. And as governments change and things like that, it's hard to say where we will be in 200 years. We look 200 years ago, we've come a long way, and I would expect that we will go a long way in 200 more years, that we will have privatized a lot of things in space. There will still be a research facet, but there will be a lot of private space ventures, probably some asteroid mining. That could be within 100 years or less, is my theory. By 200 years, we should definitely be decently settled on Mars, and it's possible that we will have outposts on some of the large moons of the outer solar system, Europa. We could potentially terraform parts of Europa, perhaps bubbled, and take advantage of the fact that there's water underneath that's frozen surface, so take advantage of any place where there's water for, living or for fuel. And that's kind of what I think. But other than that, it's unpredictable. But I do think it will not be a straight line to get there. There's going to be a lot of change. And hopefully we make some breakthroughs that make some of this exploration much cheaper and much simpler. And I think we will. I think it will just be, it won't be as exotic or as expensive relative to now for space travel. It would be much more commonplace. And then by then, who knows what else we will have discovered in the universe. So I look
I
forward to
know
it.
you like
I
think
won't be here, but I still look forward to, thinking forward. I wish I could see it.
you might be here. My children are
Cryo-frozen.
really into longevity research. So,
Yeah.
we're making, you might, uh, 90% of the people alive today might be alive in 200 years. So that would be a kind of a freaky, our whole concept of the
Right.
life cycle might be completely changed.
I do think that we will be extending our lifespans with different genetic manipulation and other forms of manipulation. But, and also it could be a situation where we can download our consciousness or something like that. There's a lot of science fiction around that, and particularly for long-term space travel. Who knows what that looks like? Cryo-freeze, different things like that, that right now are science fiction tropes, but could be some form of reality one day.
So you mentioned you wanted to be an astronaut, and people's views and things change. If you could, would you still take that trip to space?
I would, yes.
And how far would you go?
As far as I could.
Well, if you went to orbit, for example, like on Inspiration 4 style trip, is there anything in particular that you'd want to do?
Other than take a lot of pictures. And then I would probably try to do some art, make art of it, because I'd like to do art as well. But I think that I would want to write about it, because I'm a writer, and I would want to write down every experience that was happening so that future generations could read that and understand exactly what it was like. I'd want to capture that, not just with video or camera or like any still photo or video or anything. I think that I would write about it. I would write descriptive and do some art, capture those moments in sort of two-dimensional ways.
Now, as you're talking about doing art orbiting the Earth, I can't help but think about Dear Moon, the plan to send some artists around the moon. Imagine you got to take that trip.
I'd love that.
How would that inform your art? How do you think your art would be different if you had experienced that versus, just using your imagination and kind of learning from others?
Well, I know that when I've taken a lot of flights to England in the past year, and it's taken me over the Arctic, and that I had never done before. And that alone has sort of opened up my brain to imagination. You see the curvature of the Earth from that high. I saw auroras. You're right. You're just below them, it seems like. You're suspended above the ground, and yet you're below auroras. It just really, it changes you in a good way. There's a sense of profound wonder and possibility. And also, even though you feel small, you feel more connected somehow to the universe. And I think that if I were to do a tour around the moon for art, I know that the second I would see the blackness of space, that I would be, just emotionally overwhelmed and grateful, and just a sense of wonder and beauty, and to be able to just see another little worldlet below, and just I would be it would be great. It would be great. I'd love to do it.
Now, Apollo 8, whenever they went around the moon for the first time and saw the Earth from that distance, they were more fascinated by Earth than they were by the moon, it appears. Those first people that actually go to Mars, they'll see something that no human has ever seen before, and that is the Earth actually disappear.
Yeah.
What kind of impact do you think that will have on those people?
I think it would make them appreciate the sun more, even though it will appear smaller. And any stars that they see at night, it will make them appreciate Phobos and Deimos, their little potato moons. It'll make them appreciate each other, I think, more, and realize that, okay, we're away from mama and it's time to grow up.
So let's say you or one of your descendants actually immigrates to Mars, and it's 200 years in the future, and your great granddaughter is in high school in a history class, probably bored out of her mind, but she has like this project where she has to go and research about the 2020s and talk about some pivotal moments that happened this decade from 200 years in the future. What do you hope happens in this decade that's worth remembering in 200 years?
I hope we pick up an extraterrestrial signal and it's verified. Because I think that at that point, when we look at these pictures coming back from that telescope this week, and you see those galaxies and how many there are, and that's one, as they put it, it would be like holding a grain of sand at arm's length is the piece of the sky that picture was taken. And you see the vastness of that in one tiny speck. And that's what you see, endless galaxies. Then all around you in all directions, that's everywhere. It's just unfathomable. And I think though, it would be sort of like a, okay, I can exhale moment. Like, yes, we really are not alone. You know, if we verify an extraterrestrial signature of some kind, it could be a signal, it could be evidence of some tech out there. It could be something that we pick up, which is probably the more likely to happen. I think at this point before a signal, I think we're going to pick up on a reading of an atmosphere, not unlike the WASP one, which does have water in its atmosphere, the exoplanet. But I think that we will pick up on something that indicates there is life on these exoplanets. I think it is a matter of a very few years until we pick that up, because we will be picking up biosignatures and we could be picking up a lot of interesting stuff. But if we got a signal, I think in some ways that would be a sign of intelligent extraterrestrial life versus potentially like plants or microbes or what have you that's on these planets far, far away. That alone would be incredible to pick up evidence that in an atmosphere that there's life. But to have a signal from an intelligence somewhere out there, I think would be a turning point in our species history to know for sure somebody else has already figured this out, you know, and whatever happened to them, you know, we find out next. But I think that that's a pivotal moment. I think though too, that the minute we have permanent settlement on Mars is a massive moment for human history.
That would be amazing. Just out of curiosity, are you familiar with the three-bodied problem trilogy?
I am, but I have not read it. Yeah.
The author there has a premise that the reason we haven't detected other civilizations is because the universe is actually like a dark forest with lots of predators in it.
Yes, I've heard this theory. Yeah.
And we're like the naive kids that are making a campfire that are just attracting horrible things towards us. I was just wondering, I mean, what do you think about that theory?
I think we're too common. I don't think they care. You know, like, why would you go after something? I think that there's so many planets in our galaxy alone, and probably a lot of planets that could harbor life. And I just don't see why waste the time and energy to come after this little place. There's probably way bigger fish out there, you know? So I just would not be too worried about saying, hi, I'm here, because they've known we're here. They've known for a long time because we put out radio signals that have traveled for a very long time once we started developing radio. So, you know, they would have picked that up already. Like, I just don't think that's something to get too worked up over. You know, it's a big galaxy. And, you know, I think we're very little fish.
Well, Dianne, I pretty much ran through all the questions I had for you. I see this as a time capsule for future generations, not even born yet, to kind of look back and make sense of this decade as we get ready to take those next steps on the moon. Is there anything that you wanted to talk about that we didn't get to?
I talked a bit about accessibility and how everybody should be able to have a home in space if they want it. And I think that sort of blends in with what we were talking about a utopian future, a Star Trek sort of future, is that it should be space for all. That's what I want to see. That's what I hope all the future generations will have. And I know that we will find a lot of answers out there to help us here. And we should keep trying, we should keep striving, and we should never stop lighting those candles for hope.
I definitely agree with you, and I second all those sentiments. So Dianne, thank you so much for taking some time out of your schedule to talk to me. And it's such a thrill to get to make you part of my project.
Thank you so much for having me. This has been an honor.
You have a good rest of your evening.
Too. Good night.
Bye-bye.